Today he's 21. He just hit his 21st birthday. Well, I still speak with him at least once a week on the phone for the prison allotted time. And I spent weeks out there at different parts over the 5 years I spent writing the book. I would spend about 5 or 6 hours a day interviewing him for 2-week spans. That's a difficult question. I really wanted to look into what really hooked me on this case was the Johnsons, because I really sincerely believe they deserved better. They deserved an answer to the questions they were looking into. At least they deserved a real attempt to look into what happened here. And I think that to look at them in a straightforward manner is the only chance we have of preventing them, and the Johnsons deserved that his quest was something I wanted to continue. The Johnsons were an elderly couple in rural Ohio, and they had foster parented dozens and dozens of children over the years, and Johnny was about 15 when he was placed in their home. They were better to him than anyone had ever been to him. He liked them so much that he wanted them to adopt them. But he really wanted the Johnsons to adopt him, and he really wanted to stay there, and he did not know. They lived in Spencer Township, which is just outside of Toledo. It's a very rural area, a very small population, very little crime, and I think that this was also interesting to me because I wanted to show not just in urban areas, but in rural areas and in suburbs, and it crosses all sorts of lines, economic, social. I live in Maryland, in Silver Spring, Maryland, just outside of D.C. Well, I had been hearing from social workers and teachers about these, and I was very dubious about it. So social workers presented me with a number of different cases throughout the country that sort of fit the characteristics that they were talking about. And one of those cases was this case, the Johnny Jordan case. And then I called out to Ohio. I talked to Mr. Johnson. I was very moved by, and when I talked to Johnny Jordan, I felt that I felt like I had more anger towards him than even Mr. Johnson did. And then when Johnny walked into that room the first time I interviewed him, and I realized this was a child who couldn't look me in the eye. He was too shy to look me in the eye. And he still ate meals of Little Debbie's and Coca-Cola. And he was too small for his prison jumpsuit. And he kept outgrowing his shoes, but no one could give him new shoes because the prison would only give him one pair of shoes a year. And social services was no longer involved in his case. This was just a child in an adult system. Frankly, because I think my publisher felt that he wasn't a sympathetic-looking person. He wasn't white, upper middle class. He's a kid, and he is more representative of the kids who are filling the prison system today. He's had a rough past. He often has that sort of that tough stance that I think a lot of kids take on in prison, and a lot of kids who grow up as he did on the streets do. It's a tough issue. I don't know that a lot of people want to face this. Certainly in Ohio they didn't, and they still don't. Some people don't want to face this. I think that's very important. I think there's so many things to learn, both personally and also, within the welfare system about how to prevent these situations. I think because it seems like a difficult issue, something that people don't necessarily want to look at, and they don't want to care about what happened to Johnny Jordan. But I think that Johnny is more representative of the kids who are in adult prisons now. I think most of them have come from his kind of rough background. He looks like a kid. When he was in prison, he was trying to put on weight to make him look tougher so he wouldn't get picked on as much, but the weight kind of fell into fat. You know, not a fat kid, but certainly just not a muscular man yet. He's a child still. He's been working out a lot since he's been in prison, so now he looks a little tougher. He often sits in sort of a tough inmate pose, you know, with his legs spread, like looking like he's ready to pounce, but he still has a soft look in his eye oftentimes, and he still looks like a child. Yeah. That's a good question. And at first he didn't want to talk to me. At first he wanted to get paid for participating in the book, and I told him that I wouldn't do that. And then he was reluctant. He said, "What do I get out of it?" And I said, "Don't you want to help other kids like you so kids don't wind up where you are?" He said, "Why do I care about other kids? I don't care. You're stupid if you care about other people," like that. Now that was the tough Johnny Jordan. That's the outward Johnny Jordan that you see on the surface. There's another side to Johnny Jordan, which is much more compassionate and gentle. There's only a part of him that's cut off from his emotions. My husband's a journalist for the Washington Post. He was sent to Pakistan for 3 weeks to cover the war, and it was a difficult time for me. And Johnny called every night reminding me to kiss my baby goodnight and to make sure I wasn't too lonely. And Johnny had nothing to gain from that. The book had already been out. He had already read what I had written, and it's not always a very generous and oftentimes not sympathetic look at who he is. So there are many different sides to Johnny Jordan, and just as when you look at him, there are just many different features. He often appears rough, but there's often something very young about him. And the parents, I think, were so befuddled, I guess that might be the word, that they actually named one of Johnny's younger siblings Johnny, because they had forgotten they had a child by his name. Johnny is with the third, and he's 21, and his oldest sister would be probably about 26 now. They're all split up. They're all in different places. The two youngest are with his step-grandmother, who also cared for Johnny. One of them is in juvenile prison. The eldest is on her own with 2 children of her own. Most of them, except for the eldest, have been in and out of different foster care facilities and different juvenile detention facilities. $10 a day, $12 a day, very little, considering what they're up against. So you get some of the most caring and generous people like the Johnsons, and some people who can't get a job anywhere else and are looking for any extra income they can get. Well, in prison, in adult prisons, 3/4 of the kids serving time in adult prisons are black. Johnny's African American. The Johnsons were African American. She was almost 70, and I'm sorry, she was 62. Her husband was 70. Johnny had been with the Johnsons for 3 months. He loved playing checkers with Mr. Johnson. He loved teasing and joking with Mrs. Johnson. He felt very comfortable there, and they really liked him. I would say of Johnny's foster parents, all the ones that I interviewed did it at least partly, at least mostly, almost all of them. A number of them spoke to me off the record, and several of them spoke to me on background. And some of them would corresponded to me but did not speak directly to me. So I think that I was married. He's 14 months. He's 14 months. That came out in 92 or 93, right? People making their homes in tunnels under New York. I went to school at Washington University in St. Louis, and then I went to Columbia Journalism School, and I was an intern working at a newspaper, and I was working in tutoring some kids, and one of the kids said that she had a friend who lived in the tunnels under New York, and I didn't believe it. So I started working in soup kitchens and networking in the homeless circles and found out that there were literally thousands of people living in the tunnels under New York City and making their homes there. Oh, that's very difficult. There were communities of, like under Grand Central, there was a community of over 100 people right there. It's not there anymore, but and then there were tunnels like under Riverside Park where you'd get 3 or 4 people living together in sort of neighborhoods. Well, I was once mistaken for a homeless person by a homeless person above ground. Not that I intended to fit in, it was just my boots and my pea coat was missing a button, and I wore my hair in a ponytail, you know. I didn't try and fit in, but I just wore the thickest boots I could because I was so afraid of that third rail, and it was mostly wintertime when I was there, so heavy coats. It started off as an adventure. It really did. I just found it fascinating. And then as I watched people die of everything from AIDS to simple colds, people unable to care for themselves. Yeah, in fact, the fear hit later. You know, when I look at my son, I look into his eyes, and I think, was I crazy? I could have missed out on this, you know, and now that I have his life to look after, and to look after my husband as well, I can't imagine doing it again. My father's a journalist. Yeah, he recently retired from Los Angeles Times. Robert Toth, he covered national security. And he was also a foreign correspondent, and we lived in London and in Moscow during the years of the Soviet Union. And in the 70s, he wrote articles about Soviet refuseniks. And he had been threatened and told not to write these articles, and he was arrested, and he was interrogated, and he was sentenced, or he was accused of being a spy, just to prevent him from writing these articles, which I'm very proud of him for. He really stood up for what he believed was an important truth to be told. I found that inspiring. He was pretty angry about the tunnels. He threatened to break all my fingers to prevent me from writing and to keep me out of the tunnels. But my little brother told me that I should do it. He said, just do what you always do, don't listen, and just do it. But then again, he was an undergraduate student at Stanford, so like me, he didn't realize how, I think, bad things could get. Now, and with Johnny Jordan, I think my father had a lot of different feelings about it. My father works closely with me when I write these books. He's the toughest editor I hope I'll ever have, because he's pretty tough. But and he was nervous about my association with Johnny. But in the end, I think he understands how important it is. Right, and our relationship changed substantially after I'd finished the book. During the book, I purposefully was cold to him. I purposefully kept up he had my number to call me collect. And I hadn't yet had my son during most of this time. And I felt that it was a professional relationship. In fact, there are often times I asked him tough questions, and he gets so angry that I wondered if he'd ever call me back or if that was the end. But I had to ask those questions, and I had to really put it to him. And then after the book came out, a type of self-awareness developing in Johnny, just having some connection to the outside world, because everybody had fallen away from him. The only person that he still kept in contact was with his former attorney, Ron Wingate. Right, he was assigned an attorney. Just $1,000 or $2,000 for all the amount of work he put into this case. He put an astounding amount of work into this case. It just because it was a court-appointed lawyer, and so this was something that he was expected to take on, this case in addition to his other cases. But he got very involved in Johnny's case, He really felt strongly. He felt this could be my kid. You know, if the situations were different, this could have been my kid. His other attorney felt very differently. He never felt that his stepchildren could become Johnny Jordan's. Yeah, and Wingate's African American and Meyer is white. I don't think so. I really don't think that Johnny notices color very much. I don't think that affects him very much. And maybe it affected the attorneys. You know, maybe the African American attorney could identify with the things that Johnny was up against more than the white attorney could. Mm-hmm. Because Mr. Johnson sought reform within the foster care, juvenile justice, and mental health care systems beyond the 4th grade. And I think that affected his ability to get the help that he needed to get these reforms. But he did have an attorney who was a former social worker who was going to fight for these reforms and trying to prove that the foster care system had been negligent in not telling, or criminal in not telling the Johnsons of Johnny's past. Now, it was really impossible to prove that they were anything but negligent in not telling the Johnsons, that it wasn't, it wasn't out of cruelty that they didn't tell them, it was just negligence. So there was an out-of-court settlement for just under $1 million. And if we can tell these stories and be honest about them, if we can really look at what's going on, we can prevent them. And these kids are our greatest hope. This is at the point at which we can change things. It's harder to change when people are in their later years or even middle years living in the tunnels under New York and they have nothing to go back to above ground. But these kids, they have a future and they know it. And all of the kids that I've talked to, they want to do right. They want to do good things. They want approval. They don't want to go out and murder somebody. But they're not getting what they need to develop into a healthy human being. And to me, that's what's so important. That's why these stories are important. That's a good question. I don't know if I know the answer to that. I know that when I get involved in these books, I feel a real commitment to them. And because they give me so much, I learn so much about myself and about what's going on around me. I feel so much more enriched knowing someone like Johnny Jordan even, and knowing Mr. Johnson. He taught me things that still today I think about every day. And I want to present things to people. I want readers to read what I have to write and come up with their own ideas, their own conclusions. A lot of people who have read my books have actually taught me things about things I've written. You know, they've seen other things than I've seen, and that's important to me. I have some ideas. I certainly hope there'll be a next book. Yeah, again, I think it will be nonfiction. My father keeps trying to encourage me to get out of the kinds of nonfiction I've been writing about, something a little safer, he says. But I have some ideas. Thank you.